Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's be honest. We've all felt that sudden knot in our stomach when someone hands back our work and it's just absolutely covered in red ink, right? Well, today we're decoding the entire life cycle of refining a document. We're going to cover the whole shebang, from navigating the tricky interpersonal dynamics of giving feedback to a colleague, all the way down to the nitty-gritty, microscopic level of proofreading symbols on a printed page. Because whether you're leading a team, reviewing a peer's essay, or doing a final pass on your own writing, how we critique matters immensely. So let's kick things off with a highly relatable question. You know the compliment sandwich, right? Say something nice, deliver the bad news, finish with another nice comment. But is it actually working? I mean, think about it. When you hear a compliment right at the beginning of a feedback conversation, you're probably just bracing for the inevitable drop. It kind of makes the praise feel like insincere bait, just to soften a harsh truth. And honestly, it leaves us completely confused about what actually needs to change. All right, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at the feedback flaw, then move into better feedback frameworks, explore the peer review process, break down whether to revise, edit, or proofread, and wrap up with some proofreading techniques. Section 1, the feedback flaw. We're going to look at why just being nice isn't always helpful, and how forced praise completely blurs honest reflection. Because let's face it, that traditional sandwich method, it's confusing and it's hollow. Instead, take a look at this alternative, the start-stop-continue method. Talk about direct, actionable clarity. Instead of burying your criticism between two slices of forced praise, you tell someone exactly what actions they need to start doing, what behaviors they should stop, and what successful habits they really need to continue. It completely removes the guesswork. You could literally just say, start sending agendas before meetings, stop booking back-to-back calls, and continue clarifying action items at the end. Boom. Simple, direct, and incredibly easy to act on. Which brings us to Section 2, better feedback frameworks and how to deliver honesty with empathy without dodging the discomfort. Now, the absolutely crucial point to remember here is that these aren't competing tools. You can totally use them all together in a single conversation. First, you can balance directness with care using radical candor, making sure the person knows you care personally while you're challenging them directly. Second, describe the issue using SBI. That's naming the specific situation, the observed behavior, and its actual impact. This is great because it removes all the judgment. And finally, instead of dwelling on past mistakes, brainstorm future solutions using feed forward. Focusing on future possibilities literally stops defensiveness right in its tracks. And the questions we ask drastically shape the feedback we get back. This is perfectly mapped out by the Merlin Works axis of inquiry. If you ask a closed, vague question, like, is my driving okay? You're basically asking for a fearful or defensive response. But if you jump up to that top right quadrant, the fabulous zone, by asking open, really specific questions, like, what are 3 ways I could make my driving better for you? You immediately shift out of unhelpful territory and into a super productive, actionable conversation. All right, let's shift gears to Section 3, the peer review process. We're moving from general leadership feedback into the highly vulnerable act of writing. Just take a second and keep this quote by Neil Gaiman about imposter syndrome in the back of your mind. Writers are in a super vulnerable position. Even the most highly experienced creatives suffer from the fear of being exposed as a fraud. So when you're giving feedback on a draft, your critique absolutely needs to be empathetic. Writing is vulnerable. You have to recognize a writer's strengths right alongside their areas for improvement. The goal here is to guide them to an awakening about their work, not to just shut them down entirely. So let's look at how to actually do that using a structured, mindful peer review process based on guidelines from San Jose State University. Notice how the reviewer first absorbs the text in step 1 by just listening to it read aloud. No pens, no marking it up, just listening. Then in step 2, you read silently to really build a relationship with the text, maybe highlighting where you have questions. Step 3, that's all about conversation, learning the writer's process and highlighting their strengths. It is only in step 4 that you finally evaluate, check if your questions were answered, and look at the movement and transitions of the paper. It's slow, it's methodical, and it's a deeply empathetic way to review. Moving on to Section 4, revise, edit, or proofread. Once you're out of the peer review group, you have to refine the document yourself, but people constantly mix these 3 stages up. Let's break it down. Revision is your macroscopic view. You are strictly looking at the big picture. Logic, structure, ensuring your thesis is clearly stated. Ask yourself, do all the paragraphs actually support the thesis? Is the overall argument working? If it's not, well, you're moving entire paragraphs around, or maybe even rewriting sections entirely. Actually, scratch that, you're probably rewriting a lot. Do not worry about commas at this stage, because honestly, you might end up deleting that whole sentence anyway. Then we have editing, which zooms in just a bit closer. This is where you're reading aloud to verify if the paragraph flows well. Are your transitions smooth? Did you choose the absolute best words? Are you varying your sentence lengths, or are you maybe relying a little too heavily on the passive voice? This stage is really where the specific style and tone of your piece are hammered into shape. And finally, proofreading. This is the most microscopic stage of them all. You are absolutely no longer changing arguments or shifting sentence structures. You are simply hunting down a missing comma, a wrong preposition, a misspelled word that spell check somehow missed, or an incorrect citation format. Think of it as the absolute last coat of polish on your document. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Pro Proofreading Techniques for Catching Those Invisible Errors, using specific shorthand symbols. Now, because editors request the exact same basic changes over and over, they use standard proofreading marks, like the ones curated by the Hemingway Editor Guide, to decode what honestly might look like ancient hieroglyphics. But once you know them, it's a game changer. Using symbols like the pilcrow to denote a new paragraph or the little caret to insert text makes it infinitely easier to quickly annotate a printed draft. You don't have to write out full, long-form instructions every single time you spot a mistake. It is an incredibly efficient shorthand. But to ensure those symbols actually catch the mistakes in the first place, you've got to use these top hacks from university writing centers. First off, don't rely purely on a computer screen. Print a physical copy out. And my absolute favorite tip here, read it backwards. Seriously, read one sentence at a time, starting from the very end of the paper and moving to the beginning. Why? Because if you read normally, your brain is way too smart. It'll automatically correct written mistakes and fill in missing words. By reading backwards, you break that logical flow and literally force your brain to look at the actual words printed on the page. So we have covered a ton of ground in this explainer today. Whether you're utilizing the SBI framework to finally ditch that awful compliment sandwich, asking open and specific questions to get truly fabulous feedback, or trying that backwards reading trick to catch a hidden typo, I challenge you to actually apply these actionable techniques. Think about it. The next time you sit down to give or receive a critique, how will you change your approach to ensure it actually leads to real growth? Thanks for joining me, and happy editing.